You can't work. You're just a burden to everyone. You're incapable. Hi, I'm Annika, and I'm a professor who does research, amongst other things, on disability and employment. It's currently Disability Employment Month over in the United States, so I thought this would be a good time to chat about disability employment. The main thing I want to start off with is there are too few disabled people in jobs. I'm not saying that every disabled person needs to work or wants to work. But there are many, many disabled people out there who want to work but are simply not employed. For instance, only about a quarter of visually impaired and blind people in the UK have a job. Within the neurodivergent community, there are some groups where employment rates are as low as 9%, 9 out of 100. So something needs to change. And just so we're clear, it's not as once people are in job, everything is fine. It so isn't. My research and that of others very clearly show the ongoing discrimination, microaggression, and marginalization faced by disabled people at work. After all, there is a reason why you will definitely have colleagues or classmates who are disabled and you have no idea because they're not telling you. And why they're not telling you? Because they're worried about the reaction. But let's get back to recruitment. How are we going to get more people into jobs? And why is recruitment so important? A lot of stuff goes wrong at that stage. We write job descriptions that already disqualify or discourage a lot of disabled people from applying. If it asks for someone who's basically always available and always there, everyone who has an energy limiting condition or a condition that requires regular medical appointments or fluctuating ability to do certain activities already feel, well, I don't need to apply, I'm not going to get it anyway. Then the recruitment process in itself excludes a lot of people. Many neurodivergent people, people with social anxiety, with speech impairment, with hearing loss, might find interviews extremely challenging and aren't able to perform at the level that shows their skills and capabilities. That's not all. Recruitment and the interviews, assessment centers themselves can be full of discrimination. And here I want to share a couple of my own stories, because I don't just see that in my research, I've lived through it myself. These stories are all a few years old. This was way back when I was a master's student at the age of 23, trying to find a job after I finished my postgraduate degree. Back then, I had no plans of going into academia. So let's dive into these two stories. First story was at a large bank that prided itself in diversity. All over their website and everywhere, it was, we're so diverse and so forth. So I thought, well, that should be a good place for me. If they're diverse, they should be happy to employ a visually impaired 23-year-old woman. I'm saying visually impaired because back then I was only visually impaired. I went to blindness a few years later, so in the middle, right bang in the middle of my PhD. Amazing timing. But back to the story. So I thought, cool. I was invited to an assessment center and an interview. It was already a slightly unusual assessment center because it was just me. Usually assessment centers are done with multiple applicants, but this one was just me. The interview went reasonably well, I would say, but there were already a couple of things that surprised me. Let's put it that way. Because again, remember, they said we're so diverse. And they told me the makeup of the rest of the team. I was applying to become a graduate staff member. All the other staff members were men, all from the same region in that country, this all happened in Germany, all had done the same type of apprenticeship and studied the same kind of degree. And about 80% even at the same university. So in my head, I was already thinking, well, that doesn't sound very diverse. It's basically the same person multiple times. But I said, well, maybe the rest of the organization, this bank, is more diverse, and it's just this team, and they're trying to change this. I had asked beforehand if I could use my own laptop, which had Zoom text and magnification software on it. I wasn't a screen reader user back then. I was using severe, like way big letters to read. They said no. And also that I wouldn't need it. So I thought, fair enough. I went there, and as part of the assessment center, I had to do an investment calculation. Asked was, imagine that we were just able to get at a really cheap price this large piece of land in the middle of the financial district of this big city. Now, we don't know what to do with it. So suggest 4 different use cases for this piece of land. And then for the one you think would be the best, run the investment calculation to show us how much money we could gain back within the next 10 and 20 years if we follow your investment suggestion. Ooh, that was hard to say. So that was straightforward. As part of my undergrad degree, I had done accounting and auditing. So I knew how to do this. That wasn't the problem. But then the problem started. They gave me a calculator, a piece of paper, and a pencil. So the calculator was one of those with like the really tiny displays that are also basically dark letters on dark gray background. So while I could type in everything, I couldn't read what it said. And then the pencil. I've never in my life been able to see pencil. At that point, I could read pen, as long as it was sort of black and one of the thicker pens. I could read that if it was large enough. And it wasn't words. I couldn't read handwriting, but I could still read like math calculations. I could read numbers. That's what I'm trying to say. So I sat there with a calculator that I can't use, with a writing utensil, which I can use, but then can't read what I've written. And I don't know how many of you have ever done an investment calculation, but that isn't just 5 plus 5 equals 10 level. Those are quite complex equations. I worked on the equation, and I was trying to do all of this with the help of long division and long multiplication and all of that, because I couldn't use the calculator. And I was also trying to keep all the numbers in the steps I took in my head. And you can probably already think this through and skip forward and know I completely crashed. That did not work out at all. So no surprises there. I didn't get the job. I actually left, and I still remember standing. I just managed to get out of that building where I was, after I was told I was probably not the right person, that I didn't have the right knowledge and skill set and abilities to do this job and so forth. I left, went to the train station. I was just a few streets away, and stood at the train station. And it was one of those days, of which I unfortunately had many in my life, but it was one of those days where I just felt awful. And I blamed myself. I thought there was something I could have done differently. I was convinced I would never get a job, that I would never be happy. Because again, that wasn't the first time anything like that happened. It was just at a slightly higher scale. What I didn't realize back then, but of course do looking back, that they had no intention ever to employ me. They just invited me because German disability law required them. And they made sure to set me up for failure. I didn't see it back then. I was still struggling with severe internalized ableism. where it's basically taking on all the negative stereotypes and prejudice and stigma attached to visual impairment and blindness. Is you can't work, you're just a burden to everyone, you're incapable. And this is, of course, all nonsense. I know, but I didn't know it back then. I know now that, of course, if I could have used my laptop, I would have aced that. I would have won those investment calculations like nobody's business. But the only thing I can remember is feeling belittled, feeling stupid, feeling dumb, and crying a lot at a random train station in a strange city in Germany. And calling my partner, calling my parents, trying through all the tears, somehow convey what happened. And all along, feeling it was my fault, that I had tanked, that I had been the one who failed. That it wasn't them who failed, but that was me. So after that, just a few weeks later, somewhere around the same time, I had another interview. This time at a large insurance company. Yes, I really wanted to go into finance and insurance at some point. Don't know why. So this time was a large insurance company. And the interview went well until sort of a certain point where they asked me if I had insurance. I thought, what's this about? I said, yeah, of course. So I thought maybe they're just testing me and sort of trying to understand what sort of insurances private people can have versus corporate insurances. So I was talking a bit about it. They said, well, we're specifically interested in liability insurance. So I talked to them about what liability insurance is, how it works, and so forth, what the difference between corporate liability insurance and public liability insurance and private liability insurance and so forth. They said, no, that's not what we mean. And I said, then I'm sorry, I don't know what you're asking. They said, well, does your liability insurance cover everything you break in the office? And I said, what do you mean? I haven't broken anything. I said, yeah, but if we employ you, and because you're visually impaired, you're going to bump into stuff and you're going to check our monitors, our displays, and our laptops and other expensive equipment off tables. So who's going to pay for that? And I said, nobody, because that has literally never happened. And it won't happen. I said, but what if it does? Are you going to pay for that? Are we going to get the money back from the government? We just sort of want to know, if you break stuff, who pays for it? And looking back at that time, I was really perplexed, but I was also starting to advocate and so forth much more for myself. So looking back at my 23-year-old self, or might have just been 22 or just turned 23, can't quite remember, I'm really proud, because I said, I don't know, I also don't care. I got up and I told them that this company would not be one I would want to work for because of the way they just treated me, because of questions they had asked me, and I left. And again, just understand, disability employment is an even bigger problem in Germany, was then, still is, than it is, for instance, in the UK or the US. But as I said, I'm so proud of my younger self, standing up for herself and actually leaving. I still at some point burst out into tears, because again, it just reconfirmed my belief that I will never get a job. And I always wanted to work. There's always something. that was part of my future in my mind, working, having a family and working. That's like, how is this going to be? I don't want to live off benefits. I don't want to live off my parents, and I'm so well educated. I had a bachelor degree with high distinction, and I was in the final part of my master's, for which I ended up getting distinction as well, and the Dean's Honor Roll and all of that. But despite all of these academic achievements, and having done lots and lots of internships and placements and everything I could, I just couldn't get a job because I was facing these kind of questions and scenarios in interviews again and again and again. Yes, and the short end of the story is it wasn't just my 23-year-old or 22-year-old self. This wasn't back then, many moons ago, when I was that age. No, it's the reality of many hundreds, thousands, and millions of disabled people today. Unfortunately, if companies and individuals within companies don't tackle the stigma and prejudice and misconceptions they have about disability and the abilities and skills and capabilities of disabled people, this won't change. But it also won't change if we don't change how we recruit and also how we deal with staff once we have them. So I hope this was interesting to you. I will make future videos where I talk more about sort of disability employment while people are at work, and share more stories from my participants, from my research, but also those of other researchers. Please keep following. And also, if you are in a position, please consider hiring disabled people. We bring a lot to the organization. And if you're unsure what someone can do, don't go with what you assume, because they're more likely to be able to do a lot more than you can imagine. So with that, I'm going to love you and leave you. See you in the next video.